There. Okay. For your morning your morning wake up, the Sciences of Learning State of the Art to celebrate the inaugural Rural Health Workforce Research and Development Symposium. So I have no conflicts of interest and no financial disclosures, except for the one I already shared with you, which is I feel very close to you and your mission, and I want to make sure that I honor it with this talk. So today what we're going to do is we're going to have a play within a play. The talk itself will animate the things the talk is about. So we will try to remember about remembering 5 things. Here are the 5. Test enhanced learning, desirable difficulties, spacing of learning, interleaving of learning, and these great self theories of the professor Carol Dweck. These are 5 empirically derived sciences which have shown how humans learn and remember, learn and retain. So I'm going to ask you to try to learn and retain, and I'm going to use these very sciences, of course, across the talk. Now, I'll just begin by saying, I'll have lots of these little interruptions and asides. The reason I chose 5 is because the number of things one can actually remember typically is 7 plus or minus 2 things on a list. So 7 minus 2 is 5. But when you're making lists of things to remember or phone numbers or other things, don't forget that 7 is kind of the magic number. And so here you'll have 5. Okay. As any good talk should be, we should start with the pretest. Now, of course, it's only fair if I do this. The pretest is on these 5 things. I'll give you a moment to look at them because I'm going to ask you about the 5 things. Now, this is a bit strange, is it not? Right now, you have a list of words without meaning. So, of course, it's much more memorable to have words with meaning. But let's start with the words themselves. We'll try to hold on to this list at the start. Therefore, if you could think and imagine in your mind's eye, what are the things on that list? What were the 5 things, just these words that may or may not have any meaning to us yet? So that kind of exercise of imagining in one's mind's eye is a way of fostering learning and retention. What are the 5 domains of science we'll talk about today? So I'll have us all pause and think, what were those words? Or if you had pen and paper, you could write them down. Write down 1, 2, or maybe the 5 domains. Again, moving your hands in that way to write them down is a way we learn and retain, substantially better, by the way, than if we type them down. Or if there were no pen and paper, you could just recite them aloud to yourself. Now, it's interesting too. I work in an office where there's many speakers of French and Spanish and Portuguese, and I have some ability to do the Spanish and Portuguese to a kind of low level. But I can tell you this, the Spanish and Portuguese in my head is substantially better than Spanish and Portuguese out of my mouth. So it's important to know that when we say things out of our mouth, when we have to actually articulate the words, it also fosters memory. So here's 3 ways I could have quizzed you, but there are also 3 ways we can quiz ourselves: imagining, writing, or speaking aloud. Okay, here are the 5 things: test enhanced learning, desirable difficulties, spacing, interleaving, and the self theories of Dweck. Now, interesting thing too, if I read those as I just did, and I speak over you reading them, you rely on my words and you actually don't read them so carefully. Or if you're reading them and I'm speaking over you, how rude, then you can't actually learn them as well either. So ideally what I should do is say, here's the 5 things, and then do what's really hard for me, frankly, is just be quiet. Because in doing that, actually, you have the chance to learn. More about that in a moment. All right, the next thing is, oh my gosh, you've seen a list of 5 words. What's the use of that? Pictures are substantially better. I had a pleasure actually of once giving a talk with my friend Paul Worley at a conference where before we began, he says, David, we're not doing any slides with words. It's all pictures. And I was thinking, oh, this is never going to work. This is never going to work. But he was quite right. Not only is it true, what Paul said, but also there's a literature about this. So images are much more memorable than words, certainly than written words. So I give you a picture of the idea that pictures matter. If I could see you, I'd love to say that this is called a camera. And in the olden days, it created images. Now I think that we always use like these things, right, to make phones to make pictures. But hold on to the idea that pictures are more memorable. Okay, back to our 5 things. Shall we not add pictures to them now? So here we go. Test enhanced learning. The picture to hold on to throughout this talk will be the idea of flashcards. The front is a question, the back is an answer. Desirable difficulties. You see, the brain lifting weights. The idea that if we're doing hard work of learning, focus, intensity, kind of being really locked into ideas, that learning is substantially more memorable than if it comes too easily. Learning and relearning over long periods of time. Mixing our learning. So you learn something else, you mix them together. That also fosters learning and retention. And so too, these self-theories of the great Professor Carol Dweck. But let's look at this picture. This picture is her book cover, wonderful book cover. But nothing about this picture actually tells us what the self-theories are. So I should tell you that pictures are helpful, but only if the picture actually animates the idea. So this is a much better picture to depict the self-theories. The idea of this child having fallen off the horse needs to get back up on the horse. Try again. The theories of Carol Dweck are about the resilience and the trying and trying again. We'll get more into that in a moment. Test enhanced learning. We'll do this one first. It's known as the testing effect. It's known as testing for learning. It's known as retrieval practice, because what you're doing is spending your energy of learning trying to draw back that which you are learning as opposed to pushing it in. I'll show you how this works in a moment. Flashcards are the image we will use because after all, 6 plus 2, what is that? What is that? That's retrieving when you're trying to solve it. Or the Socratic method, someone quizzing somebody else. So think of quizzing yourself or quizzing someone else. Classically, one could quiz and the other could answer. One could also teach someone how to quiz themselves. So it's this image here I want us to hold on to. A kind of a great simple story I could tell you is when I drive to work from my home in Cambridge to the hospital, which is not too far away, I might hear a good story on the radio. And now that I've turned 25 or 35 or maybe even 55 or whatever I am, right? It's harder for me to hold on to some of the stories I hear on the radio. So what I'll do actually is as I'm driving, I'm repeating to myself and trying to reimagine what the speaker said, trying to bring the story back to my mind. So kind of quizzing myself as I go. That's so I don't forget by the time I get to the office and want to share the story with a friend. So quizzing oneself. The studies of this go back to a university in the Midwest, Washington University of St. Louis, where they took 120 people between the ages of 18 and 24, the students who were undergrads. They had them read a passage either about the sun or about dolphins. You see the length of the passages. And they divided the students into two groups, two experimental groups. One group studied the passage, had 5 minutes of math to distract them, and studied the passage again, study, restudy. The other group studied the passage about the sun or dolphins, then had 5 minutes of math to distract them, and then had a blank paper that said, write down everything that you remember from the piece you just read 5 minutes ago. And then they tested the people at 5 minutes in 2 days and 1 week. As you see here, cramming does work, pushing the stuff in, kind of quickly, densely, studying and restudying does work if you're quizzed 5 minutes later, green more than yellow, study, restudy, beating, study, then test. But even 2 days later, or 1 week later, or 1 month later, or no matter how much later they test, those who had the blank paper retained better. There are multiple studies like this. So here's just another one. 180 people of the same age, the two passages again about dolphins or the sun. These are different study subjects. One group studied and had math and studied it the same passage again, distracted again, studied it a third time, distracted a fourth time. So study, 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 the same passage. The second group studied and then restudied, each with a distraction, but then had a blank paper that said, please recount what you've been studying in that passage. The third group only got the paper one time, got distracted, then got the blank paper. Please recount what you read. 5 minutes of distraction, then a blank paper again. Please recount what you remember. Then 5 minutes of distraction, and then again a blank paper. Study, test, test, test. And the same effect was seen, where those who studied recurrently, study, repeat, study, repeat, study, repeat, study, were better at 5 minutes after they finished, but even a week later or a month later or longer into the future, the people who were quizzing themselves with that blank paper retained better. It's been, again, shown time and again. And another way to see it is just this. If we think about forgetting, those who do study, 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 study forget about half in the week. And you see study, 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 test, something close to a quarter. And then those who quiz themselves and quiz themselves and quiz themselves with the blank paper studied, they forgot substantially less. So there's something about that quizzing oneself, that retrieval practice. So here's the memory plate, which I'll do for each of our 5 things. For the test enhanced learning, the idea is to quiz oneself or to be quizzed, remembering the flashcards. And the idea is that you learn for later retrieval. You learn so that you can retrieve later by doing the learning using retrieval, right? By quizzing yourself or those blank papers or whatever. So that's the simple run through test enhanced learning. Now, I should quiz you, of course, about this later in this talk, and I will. And the fact that I'm telling you I will help you remember. But this idea of self-quizzing, as opposed to just pushing and pushing and pushing in, is key. This one is even more elaborate. Desirable difficulties, the hard work of learning. So desirable difficulties could be kind of in a cheeky way demonstrated by this. Does anybody recognize this? I can't see you, so someone will have to say something if you recognize it. Anyone know who wrote that or what that's from? Anybody alive? Is everybody awake? All right, all right, all right. So this, don't feel any pressure. This is a piece from Shakespeare in Macbeth. It's the soliloquy of Lady Macbeth. And actually, I'm not kidding. I gave this talk to an audience of over 100 people in downtown London, a bunch of like scholar people, and Londoners, and none knew the reference. So that's okay. We're doing all right. But the interesting thing is having the words blank like this slows us down. And it turns out if you have things that slow you down, you actually remember better. And there have been multiple studies using little funny things like this that showed people can learn the passage more readily and memorize it longer with learning it like this. Or this. Kind of odd, right? I mean, it's in a kind of a different kind of font and it's on angle. Apparently, because it slows us down and enhances our focus, we can retain better. Now, I'm not saying we should use this as teachers, but just it's interesting to think about the merits of slowing down. There's really interesting literature. It's kind of dense. Trouble sleeping, it's helpful, about how this slowing down and focusing, making it a little more difficult, helps us retain. And this is you might find fun also. If a lecture following some pre-learning has the same content but in a slightly different format, people actually retain better. So I'll let you read it. It's not what you would think. You'd think you should put the exact same thing in the lecture that they had read the night before. So just for fun, here's our list again, okay? It's the same 5 things, but you'll notice I changed the order. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why changing the order and letting you memorize these again, if I would just stop for a second here. Why changing the order should make such a big difference? Or this? But for some reason, that helps us retain. So here's the list in the original order, just so we can keep track that we're on number 2. But yeah, there's things that slow us down and help our focus, helps us retain. Here's what's interesting. I've now shown you this list, I think 4 times in the talk. What our brains do is, because you recognize it, you don't actually read it as carefully or focus on it as much. Your learning is impaired. If I had a typo or a misspelling in this, you might not see it because it's too familiar to you. So when we want to memorize something, it's the idea that doing it many, many times helps us is not totally true. It's only helpful if we really enhance our focus, quizzing ourselves, slowing down, doing tricks to make sure that we're actually reading. Back to desirable difficulties. So if slowing down is helpful or focusing is helpful, so is the idea of generation, which means problem solving. So generation is problem solving. It's as distinct, for example, it's not recall. It's not questions of recall, like what is my first name or something. We'll get into problem solving in a minute. There's another interesting thing to know. So problem solving, or all learning and retention, is actually benefited by having some kind of emotion. Okay, so we're going to do problem solving in a moment, but first let's consider relevance and emotion. So I'm going to give you a story, and stories themselves are also better for learning and retention. So here's the story I'm going to tell you. It's a little ridiculous. It's going to expose too much about me. But at any rate, right now I live over here in Cambridge, the city next to Boston, on the eastern coast of the US. But I'm not actually from here. My nice accent is not from Boston, believe me. I'm actually from somewhere else. I'm from over here on Lake Ontario in Rochester, New York. So that's about 400 miles east-west between the two cities. It's nearly straight, just a little bit north-south difference, but almost straight east-west. Why does this matter? Why does this have emotion and relevance? Because here's the problem. When you're in Rochester, the mornings are wonderfully dark and the evenings are wonderfully light. We're further to the west of the same time zone. When I moved to Cambridge, I was completely aghast at the idea that the sun would rise at 6 a.m. and be setting in the winter at 4. It's just setting too early. It's very troublesome. I was bereft. And also, I don't like this idea of being in the operating room, not as the surgeon, but as the patient, every morning at 6 a.m. as that bright light is shining on me. So this was something that really got in my craw. I was really bothered by the excessive morning light and the lack of afternoon light. So I started to think, are we in the right time zone in Boston? Like maybe we should be in the Atlantic time zone, the one that's further to the east. This was one of these things that interested me. So let's think about this for a second. Problem solving, not recall. To solve that problem, we need recall for sure. For example, old-fashioned geometry, what's the definition of the cosine of an angle? Does anybody know this definition anymore? This is not fair to ask good people in the morning. But basically, if you have an angle like you see over here, the cosine is just the ratio of the length of this side that's close to the angle, the adjacent side, and the longest side, which is called the hypotenuse when it's a right triangle. Clearly a recall kind of question. I'm not sure it's one we have to actually know, but it's a recall question. Or this one, recall, clearly recall. What's the equation for the circumference of a circle? Yes, I know, it's something we've long since forgotten, right? But basically it's 2 times the fixed number pi, 3.14159, times the radius of the circle. So these are recall. Why am I doing this to you? This is not nice for a friend or a guest, because those are needed to actually solve my time zone crisis, my life crisis about the time zone. So here we go. If we assume the Earth is a perfect sphere, it's not quite, but if we assume that, it turns out it's just about 24,000 miles around the equator. It's a little more. And there's 24 time zones, as we know, 24 hours in a day. So the average width of a time zone at the equator is 1,000 miles. Each of the 24 time zones is about 1,000 miles plus a little bit. That's easy at the equator, but here's the thing. What should be the time zone width up here where I live, up here in the Boston-Cambridge area, at latitude of X degrees? So what you do is you take your little triangle, and it's so fun, I love this, and you problem solve. That's the radius of the Earth at the equator. It turns out so is that, right? Except from the center to the edge. Look, you can put a little angle in there. That's my latitude. And then you can drop the triangle in there. And then you can put on your adjacent side, which is the radius of where I live, which can be multiplied by 2 pi and gives you the circumference of where I live, which you can divide by 24 and find out we need to be in the Atlantic time zone. My indignation was actually right. So I'm not so bitter about this, but at least every morning now, when the lights in my eyes, I can have that little smug look on my face. But you get the idea, though, and part of why I can remember my cosine and my formula for a circle is because it had emotion, it had relevance, but also because it was problem solving. So if I were to summarize desirable difficulties, it has to do with the issues of slowing down, even if something's sort of off angle or has missing spaces, slowing down, focusing, not just, oh, I've read that before, where you're not actually paying attention. Or thinking about generation, really problem solving and having relevance and emotion. That's that literature in a nutshell. Create learning by creating effort and slowing, and from generating, not just recall. There's those two. I should probably ask you the next 3 like this, right? Can anybody remember what those last 3 were? So by the way, by my merely asking you, even if you don't answer me, by merely asking, it actually generates for you an impulse to recall, which actually helps learning and retention. So here's the answer: spacing, interleaving, and the self theories. But even the quizzing, the kind of proclivity to quiz, the quizzing action makes you do recall pathways. It's a great paper anyway that has the test enhanced learning, the spacing, and the interleaving. So here we go. I love these words, longitudinal, integrated, but the education science says spacing and interleaving. The former are these educational design terms, like we talk about longitudinal, integrated, clerkships in medicine. But those are how you design a program. These are actually the educational science terms. So we will look at those. The spacing effect first. The spacing effect has a brilliant, but really hard to read graph, which I'll show you next. And the only way to get through the graph without wanting to throw something at me would be if I show you the 3 axes of the 3-dimensional graph. One axis is the test delay, the time between when you finally learn something and when you actually need to know it. So when you're tested, or if you were a physician and, I don't know, you did an EKG on somebody, you learn all about EKGs, you learn all about EKGs as a young doctor, and then your first EKG on somebody is a month later. That's when the test of life is coming to you, when you actually have to know it. So that's one of the axes. The other one is simply the space in time between learning and relearning episodes. You could learn and then learn a day later. You could learn and then learn a week later. You could learn and then learn a month later. Spacing, the spacing effect, spacing means the space between learn and relearn episodes. Test delay is the time from when you finally learn something to when you need to show what you know. That's the spacing effect. Don't worry, I'll explain this. This strangely shaped graph works like this. The longer you hope to have retention of something, the longer you can hold on to something you learned, this here, right, this yellow thing, that's the test delay, right? The longer you remember it after you learned it. The more study gap you need, that's this blue thing here, the more time you need between learning and relearning if you want to maximize your retention, which is this axis here. So the way I can show it to you is that red line you see there on that graph. I'll make it colorful and show you how the study gap relates to it. You need more space between learning episodes to be at the highest height on this graph. What do you mean highest height on this graph? What I mean is for whatever amount of test delay you have, so when you finally learn something and then later you need it, whatever amount of time that is, if you want to maximize yourself on the graph, maximize how much you retain, you want to have increasing amounts of study gap. So this green line here says at the highest height of that graph, for any amount of test delay requires more study gap. And the longer you want to hold on to something, even the more study gap, more time between learn and relearn, which I'll get into a little bit more in a second. Don't worry, I will not quiz you on this graph. First, I want to do interleaving, much easier. Interleaving just means this. You could learn things by massing your learning, just learning one thing at a time, super into A, and then when you're done with A, you're really into B, subject B. Done with that, you're into subject C. Or you can mix it. You could learn A, then B, then C, mixed up. So take, for example, children who learn multiple languages simultaneously. That's the ABC, BCA, CAB. They learn Spanish, they learn English, they learn Mandarin, Chinese, right? Multiple languages simultaneously, it turns out, if you can do that, you will initially get speech delay, but if they keep going with many languages together, they ultimately will have all three languages. But here's what's more. If you try to teach that child a fourth language, like a language they haven't had before, even a very different fourth language, they'll be able to learn it better. So interleaving not only gives you better retention, it actually expands the domain of what the mixed learning was, much better than if you had learned things in sequence. Here's one example of a graph that shows it simply. You see the block learners, that's the A before B before C. A week after they learned in blocks, they only have a 20% retention. Whereas the people who mixed it, they interleaved it, they mixed it, they maintain their retention for a week, and it turns out it's even longer. So I'll just, that green arrow there is better than the gray arrow there. So I like to say green, yes, gray, not so good. So the point here though is this. It's not to say that cramming all A and then all B and then all C has no use. I think we've established that cramming does help you if the test is right after. But that's extremely different than the idea of longer term retention. Now you may say, but spacing allows you to put interleaving because right, you learn something and there's a space in time between when you learn it again. Couldn't you just interleave and put something in between? Answer is yes. And if you space and interleave, you have a better retention than if you did either one alone. So spacing and interleaving together is very important. Basically mixing learning and learning over time and learning in a mixed way over time. The longer retention is needed, mix the learning to maximize results. This you know already. If we were to learn math for 8 weeks and then do no more math, and then learn like English for 8 weeks and then do no more English and no more math, and then play sports for 8 weeks and then no more sports after that, no more English, no more math. By the end of the year, you're not calculating well, you're not reading or writing so well, and you're really not fit, right? We always learn like this. And I know this is true in Australia. It's true across the globe. It's true for little people in elementary and middle schools. It's true in high schools and universities, and it's true in most graduate schools that aren't medicine. This idea of doing multiple things simultaneously over time is the common way we learn. In medicine, we do this strangely. The blocks are the normal thing, which is very odd. And as Flinders University and Paul and colleagues' work has shown, you can in fact do longitudinal learning of the disciplines, multiple disciplines simultaneously over time, and people have excellent learning results. Just to say that there's something really important to remember about this idea of doing multiple things simultaneously over time. So you can have learning and relearning episodes. So for spacing, we should summarize. Create time enough between learn and relearn episodes. Learn something, wait a little while to have what they call necessary forgetting, and then learn it again. The space between learn and relearn. And mix your learning. Learn something else, learn the first thing, learn a third thing, back to the first, back to a second, mixing learning over time. Experiences. Learn and practice multiple domains at once. That's the interleaving literature. And finally, my favorite actually, the self-theories of Carol Dweck, which we will get to now. I show you the book again just to remind that pictures matter, but pictures that don't help don't matter. So again, this is the real picture, and we should explain what this is about. So Dweck was a professor at Harvard and then ultimately throughout her entire career at Stanford. She studied learning and resilience. Her work is brilliant. Anyone who's a parent or wants to learn or wants to be more resilient will love her work. I commend her books. So here's the thing. What is this picture telling us? It relates to a study, one of the original studies back in 1978, when she and her colleagues were looking at children in the classroom. And they determined this is not actually sort of a gender inclusive language. It's not modern understandings of gender, what I'm going to say to you, but they determined those are the girls, those are the boys. That's how they framed the study in the late 70s. And they observed that those who were deemed to be girls were doing substantially better in the classroom, getting much more feedback, much more grand feedback. They were actually studious, these 7- and 8-year-olds. Those that they deemed to be the boys, they actually were kind of like a pack of squirrels, as we say. They were kind of running around, cats in a bag. And if they just simply sat in their seat for a little while, it was a great day. So, oh, look, I see the way Dave Hirsch is sitting still, like something like that. So they were getting much less feedback and were accomplishing much less at that age, it turned out. And what they did was they gave the children problems they could not solve. What happened? The girls, those deemed to be girls, I'm so bad at this. I've never been good at math. I'm just so stupid. I can't do this. They quit. The boys, there's a trick here. Well, what's going on? There's a trick. And they tried to figure it out. They hung in there. They were resilient in the face of problems they could not solve. Very disturbing story. It bothered the researchers. It should bother us. But what's happening there? The researchers finally figured out that there was something about the feedback. The teachers were saying to the girls things like this: outstanding, brilliant, Lucy, so brilliant. Or, Sandy, oh my goodness, that's the best. And what happens is when people are kind of connecting who they are and what they do, like they are their outcomes. They're not being nourished by process. They're being nourished only by outcomes. And the outcomes are not just speaking to what they did, but to who they are. So in contrast, the boys were getting verbs. I noticed the way so-and-so is using his pencil. I noticed the way so-and-so is sitting still. It's action, verbs, which separates who you are from what you're doing. So they trained the teachers to give the boys more like noun type or adjective type feedback, and the girls got more the verb or action type feedback. And sure enough, the effect crossed over, and the boys were all self-defeated. I can't do this. I'm not very smart. And the girls hung in there trying to solve the riddles. That launched a 35-year canon of literature about this. And here's her insights quickly. She wants to know why people fall apart or quit, despite having received praise, big praise often, having confidence, having a long history of success. She posited 2 theories. She called them implicit theories because we don't know we have them, or self theories because they're theories of the self. One is called the entity theory. People with the so-called fixed mindset who have a performance orientation. They want to show what they know and hide what they don't know. Outcomes matter enormously to them. The process is not so much the point. As opposed to incremental theorists who have much more of what's called the growth mindset, who are nourished by the process. And in fact, they kind of want challenge. They want to not be good at things because that helps them get better. They like the challenge. So it's interesting. These so-called networks of beliefs are often held unconsciously. Even when you're conscious about them, they're unconscious. Let me give an example. If you said to me, hey, Dave, are you good at foreign languages? I would answer, no, I'm not really a foreign language person. I've never been good at foreign languages, right? As if there's something about me, like my entity, me, like Dave, is just not a foreign language person. If you said, Dave, could you, I don't know, run a 5 kilometer race? I would say, sure, if I worked out and did some running for a few weeks, as if my efforts could get me there. So I don't know why I hold those views of myself, like how I always held myself to the kind of person I am. It's not a language person. That's a personhood entity thing. On the other hand, when it comes to sports, I feel like I could just practice and get better at them. Very strange. I don't know where my view comes from, but I'm trying to resist it. So here's the point. If you look at the different domains like talent or intelligence or morality or sports or language or anything, if you look at these domains specifically and in large populations, young people, people who are older in school, people who are in universities, across the globe in multiple different cultures, it is stunning how often it breaks down about like this. In a general population, about one particular domain, let's say like in people's views of intelligence, about 40% of people hold an entity view of it, about 40% of people hold an incremental view of it, about 20 are in between. My friend David Sloan and I studied 5 years of Harvard medical students using the tools that have such great validation evidence that Dweck has proposed and used. It was like just about 40 to just about 40 for the students' views of intelligence, whether it's innate or whether it's through effort, their views of talent, whether it's innate or whether it's through effort. I mean, everything we looked at, it was about 40, 40, 20. Very, very interesting. So let's do a quiz now, because after all, quizzing, testing for learning is what we should do. Here's the quick quiz. If someone's an entity theorist, all right, they are what they do. They want to hide what they don't know. They're wrapped up in who I am is what I do. And they're faced with a problem they cannot solve. What do? Again, the mere fact that I'm asking you, don't have to answer, but the mere fact that I'm asking you should help retention. The point is they quit, right? They wouldn't want to be exposed or found out to not know something, right? They have the fixed mindset, the one that perceives that you are what you do and that outcomes are all that matters. Effort is not the arbiter of ability. They have a performance approach. They want to perform what they know and hide what they don't know. And in contrast, incremental theorists, when faced with a problem they don't know the answer to, they will persist, maybe slowly, maybe with effort, because they've got the growth mindset. They're nourished by process. The mastery approach means they seek out figuring out what they don't know. They want to be exposed for what they don't know. That's where the nourishment comes. So here's the summary. We find out that these self-theories that we don't even know we have do not depict people as being more intelligent or more able at baseline, and certainly for an array of challenges. But if the challenges get harder, your ultimate achievement strongly co-varies with the incremental or growth mindset. Those who are nourished by process, who want to face challenges predictably, would go further because they don't break down in the face of difficulty. Thinking about American politics, this one always strikes me as kind of interesting. Entity theorists are more judgmental and more rapidly adopt stereotypes than incremental theorists. You may have think about some of our would-be candidates in this country. And self-theories also can be changed. And this is the most important thing, perhaps of the whole talk. Self-theories can be changed. We can't have a fixed mindset about the self-theories, right? We can work through them and get better at them and move towards growth mindsets in an array of domains. I'm working to feel that I could just work harder and learn more foreign languages. I'll tell you a quick story about how self-theories can be changed. I'm so lucky that Paul has come to visit me here in the States, and he has met my children. They always love his gifts. And my elder of my twins the twins go to the school that's very much dedicated to the self-theories. And my older twin comes home after 5 years at the self-theories, growth mindset-oriented school with everything's about the growth mindset and learning resilience, and says to me in the doorway, he's like 12, says, "Hey, Dad, I have to tell you, I'm sorry to announce that I'm just not a growth mindset person." I was totally horrified. Besides the cost of tuition, I was horrified because a growth mindset person, that's the most fixed mindset thing I could imagine anyone ever saying. I looked at him thinking, this is not a good day. And without being too judgmental, I said, "You're not a growth mindset person?" I think my tone gave away my thought. He says, "Yeah, Dad, I'm just, it's not who I am. I'm not really one of these growth mindset people." I stood there kind of frozen in pause, and then he looks at me and says, "Yeah, I'm not a growth mindset person yet." Aha! He was a growth mindset person. He said yet. So the power, he was teasing me. The power of yet. I want to think of this idea. I'm not, to be true, I'm not that great at Spanish and Portuguese at all, but I'm not that great yet. And it's not because I'm trying to say to myself, it's not because I'm not a language person. It's because for some reason it just takes me more effort than some other people. But clearly I do believe that through effort I could learn those languages. So I'm trying to develop a growth mindset about my formerly fixed mindset about languages. So we have to get back up on the horse. We have to dust ourselves off and get back on the horse and be resilient by being nourished by the process. Foster nourishment from the process, from the hard work and getting back up. Okay, so here's the final summary. There's our 5. Are you reading them the same right now, or are you still just jumping all over them and not really paying attention? Like, right? Once we see them for the 15th time here, we just don't really read them. Let's look at them. What do those mean? We did all 5. So if we're doing if I were with you in person, we would do a post test. Like I would ask you, what are the 5 domains? And you would take a 10-second pause here. And as you're doing that retrieval practice, it's building memory. I could say, picture one of the images, picture one of the graphs. So as you push the image into your head, it builds your memory, it builds your retention. I could say, generate a little bit, generate, quiz yourself and generate. What do they mean? What were the stories? What was he saying about that thing about Rochester, New York and Boston? What? Cosine? Did I have to actually know cosine? Right? So try to be generative in bringing them back up. So the exercise, I would just name a domain, and then I give you time to pause. I pause and think about it, and you could explain it. By explaining out of your mouth, again, or by writing it down, there's more learning and retention. I should also say one last thing before we go here. A 10-second pause is the best teacher pause, certainly no less than a 7-second pause. So if I were to ask you, what is spacing? So it's hard for me as a big talker to have a 10-second pause, but you get the idea that if you're going to ask a question of yourself or of someone else, the 10 seconds of that retrieval practice really helps. So here we go. Here's the final summary. That's test enhanced learning. You see how flashcards make sense now? You're quizzing yourself. What is 6 + 2? And you turn over the card and see the answer. The hard work, the slow, deliberate hard work of learning. Don't speed over something. If it's coming too easy, if it sounds too familiar, if it feels too comfortable, you're not learning as well. Remember emotion emotion and relevance. Don't forget about generating. Problem solving. Learn, have some time, relearn, have some more time. The longer the time between learn and relearn, the more you'll retain for the longer term. Mixed learning. Learn something else. Mix the learning. And then put those together. Put spacing and interleaving together. Learn, mix it, learn again, mix it. And of course, try to separate who you are from what you do. Yes, seek high performance, but be nourished by the process. Get back up on the horse. Be resilient in your learning. Don't believe that you are what you know. Rather, you are the effort you put in. So I would just summarize by saying, now the real work begins, right? But man, not real work. That's not right. It's actually now the kind of the hard work begins, the generative work begins. You get the idea. We have to hold on to these 5 things, and those are 5 of the important empirically derived sciences of learning, not learning theories, empirically derived sciences. Hope that was helpful for your wake up this morning. I'm happy to entertain any questions or ramble on endlessly about these subjects.